I'm just practicing for Motzei Shabbos. This was Yitzhak Meir, the singer that I played now. He was in our shul in Ol Nechama 11 years ago for the Slichos, and it was uploaded to YouTube for generations to come. So this morning, when I just to make sure that I had it on YouTube, said it was a shir from the Rav Zechron Levracha in Yiddish that he gave to either a convention of rabbis or at a Chag HaSmicha, because he was talking to Rabbanim, and just listening to him, wow. Yeah.
If you understand Yiddish.
But this has English subtitles. It had English captions. So even if you don't understand the Yiddish, you can just follow it with the English. Sometimes they have Hebrew subtitles, whatever. It was very good.
It's on the internet?
YouTube HaKodesh. That's it.
Is there a date? How do you identify who?
So you just, you can do Shiurim, Rabbi Soloveitchik in English, or in Hebrew even, and you'll get a whole menu of different Shiurim. Usually it's 15, 20-minute clips. The Shiurim are 4 hours, these Shiurim. But sometimes what they did was they took a theme from the shir and they spliced it and they put it up. And so you can sit and listen to 15, 20 minutes and say the, because if they put up a 4-hour shir, nobody's going to listen to it. But I'm talking about a shir that was said in front of 3,000 people in an auditorium at the Yeshiva University, and there was no break. There was no break.
My husband went to all of them.
There you go.
Washington. He drove up.
He drove up from Washington, right? He wasn't the only one to come from out of town.
And they, every good thing.
Right, for the Yahrzeit shir. Correct. Gimel Shvat. Okay. This week we're going to deal with the piyut, the poem Ben Motzei Menucha Ki Damnucha Tchila, which is the highlight of this coming Motzei Shabbat's opening number of Slichos for Ashkenazim. As we mentioned last week, the Slichot of the Sfaradim are already in progress since the beginning of Elul, and they go strong for 40 days until Yom Kippur with the identical Slichot. So, what was that? Right, this week's shir is, as is the case, thank you, Lisheva Frist, Lisheva Batsima, Zechrona Levracha. It's the third year Hallie Frist, who didn't come yet, but I think she's going to come in soon, is dedicating the shir. Our daughter, it's the third yahrzeit. Our daughter, unfortunately, was killed in a car accident 3 years ago. Nice young woman. And Hallie is a former student of mine from the Frisch School in Paramus, New Jersey. So she comes regularly, and she has dedicated the shir for the entire year. Okay. Motzei Menuchat Ki Damnucha Tchila. We come to you on the opening on Motzei Shabbat. Motzei Menucha is Motzei Shabbat. And this is in line with the Ashkenazi custom that we discussed last week to open up the Slicha season on Motzei Shabbat. So there was a convergence of two different customs. Custom number one, to have at least 4 days of Slichot before Rosh Hashanah, and this was in line with the Hasidei Ashkenaz custom to fast Aseret Yemei Teshuvah. Of course, they didn't fast 10 days without eating at night. It was break your fast at night, but to go on for 10 days and fast. This says something about fasting on Yom Tov, because Rosh Hashanah is Yom Tov. So they fasted for 10 days, except that the problem was the Slichot that the Rambam talked about was actually 10 days of Slichot. Even though the Rambam was Sephardi, but he never heard of the 40 days of Slichot. He had 10 days, Aseret Yemei Teshuvah from Rosh Hashanah until Yom Kippur, including Rosh Hashanah. The Hasidei Ashkenaz wanted to fast for 10 days, every day of Slichot. But they were caught by 4 days that you're actually not allowed to fast. 2 days Rosh Hashanah is Yom Tov, can't fast. Shabbat Shuvah is always a Shabbat in between, you can't fast. And Erev Yom Kippur, you're not allowed to fast. So Erev Yom Kippur not fasting is not just because you want to fill up the tank before you fast. That's what it seems like. But the Rav gave a different understanding to it. and that is that Yom Kippur is also a Yom Tov. And as a Yom Tov, you're supposed to have a good Yom Tov meal. But how can you have a Yom Tov meal on Yom Kippur when the Torah says, V'initem et nafshotechem, you have to fast? So we simply fulfill the Simchat Yom Tov the day before, on Erev Yom Kippur. So we eat on Erev Yom Kippur in lieu of the Su'udat Yom Tov that we should have been eating on Yom Kippur itself. And that's how the Rav understood the Kabbalistic idea that, the Torah never calls Yom Kippur in the singular. It's Yom Kippurim. It's Yom Kippurim. It's like Purim. And the truth is, that's quite weird, because the last day in the calendar that you might associate Yom Kippur with would be Purim. So the Rav gave a whole shir, I'm not going to repeat this now, but just one point, and that is that on Purim, the day is defined as a Yom Mishteh V'Simcha, but it's also a day that we should be fasting because it was a near miss. This was Lahashmid, Laharog, Ula'abed, et Kol HaYudim, Mina'ar Va'ad Zakein, Taf and Hashem B'Yom Echad. It was almost a Holocaust. It was almost an annihilation of OUisrael. So we should be fasting that day. But how can you fast on a day that's Yom Mishteh V'Simcha? So we move the fasting to the day before, and that's where Tanit Esther was born. So it's Yom Kippurim. It's just like Purim, where the day splits. It has a dual identity, except that on Purim, we've emphasized the Mishteh V'Simcha on that day, and we made up the fast day the day before. On Yom Kippur, we fast on Yom Kippur, because that's the core fulfillment, but we make up the Yom Mishteh V'Simcha the day before on Erev Yom Kippur. So that's a day on Erev Yom Kippur that you're not allowed to fast. You must necessarily eat. And by the way, this plays into the question, if a person has to eat on Yom Kippur because of medical reasons, does that person have a mitzvah to eat on Erev Yom Kippur? Now, obviously, you can eat on Erev Yom Kippur. If you're eating on Yom Kippur, you can eat the day before too. But the question is it a mitzvah for that person to eat on Erev Yom Kippur, or is the mitzvah to eat on Erev Yom Kippur only for those who are fasting? And so this really plays into the Rav's understanding that even if a person is eating on Yom Kippur, that's not going to be considered his Simchat Yom Tov. He's still going to have to eat on Erev Yom Kippur for that reason. So anyway, so the 4 days of Aseret Mechuvah that we are not allowed to fast, the Hasidei Ashkenaz moved the fast back by 4 days. And this is where Ashkenazi custom kicked in and said, let's have our Slichot for at least 4 days before Rosh Hashanah. Why at least? 4 days is 4 days. Because kicked in from a completely different angle, a secondary minhag, and that was to always begin the Slichot season on Motzei Shabbat. And that's what we talked about a little bit last week, that Motzei Shabbat has the spirit of Eliyahu Hanavi, all kinds of special things about Motzei Shabbat. So that's why this year when Rosh Hashanah comes out on a Tuesday, we're going to have a very long, actually the longest, season for Slichot of Ashkenazim, because we're going to start this Motzei Shabbos and have Slichot the whole week and cut over to the next week, Sunday and Monday. So it's a long period of Slichot. When Rosh Hashanah comes out on Thursday, you get your 4 days from Motzei Shabbat, which is Yom Rishon, and Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and that's Erev Rosh Hashanah, and you're done with the pre-Rosh Hashanah Slichos. So the Paitan, whose name is Shmuel. Now, how do we know his name is Shmuel? If you look at the Lishmoa El Harina, so I've emphasized the Shin Mem of the third line of the poem, which is the refrain, Lishmoa El Harina Ve'la Tfilah, the Shin Mem Vav, and then the Aleph Lamed spells out the name Shmuel. Now, it's a little bit strange. Now, why did the poet, how does he allude to this? How are we supposed to figure this out? If it would be acrostic, we'd figure it out. If it would be one word, Shmuel, we'd figure it out. But here it's Lishmoa El. How am I supposed to know that he's drawing our attention to the fact that the Shin Mem Vav and then the Aleph Lamed is his name Shmuel? Because in Tanakh, in Malachim Aleph Perek Chet, there is no Vav. There is no Vav. The Lishmoa El Harina Ve'la Tfilah in Tanakh, in Malachim Aleph Perek Chet, in Shlomo Melech's Tfilah, it's without a Vav. If you look at the flip side of the page, source number, I must have written it. Source number 3. Ufanita el tfilat avdecha ve'el tchinato Hashem Elokai Lishmoa el harina ve'la tefillah. Look at the word lishmoa. It's lamed shin mem ayin. There is no vav. The, number 3, source number 3 in the second page. Right? Ufanita el tfilat. David Shlomo Melech, on the opening ceremony of the Beit HaMikdash, the first Beit HaMikdash, he gives a very beautiful tefillah. It's a long tefillah. He invites people who have all different kinds of difficulties. It could be famine, it could be medical related, it could be whatever it may be, parnasa, all kinds of different issues. You know, we don't have to think a lot about tzarot. Tzarot are there, so we know about them. And he invites the nations of the world all to come to Beit HaMikdash with the tefillah. Lishmoa el harina ve'la tefillah. What's conspicuously absent in Tfilat Shlomo Melech is korbanot. He doesn't say a word about sacrificial activity. And you might think, Beit HaMikdash is for korbanot. All right, you also daven there. No, it's the other way around. Beit HaMikdash is a Beit Tfilah, where we also bring korbanot. It's a very, very different take on what Beit HaMikdash is all about. Yeshayahu integrates both themes, where he says, "V'haviotim al har kodeshi, v'simachtim beveit tfilati, olotehem v'zivchehem l'ratzon al mizbechi, ki beiti beit tfilah yikarei l'chol ha'amim." Right, we say that in America, on the open roads, they have the International House of Pancakes. We have the International House of Prayer. Beiti beit tfilah yikarei l'chol ha'amim. It's tfilah. And the Rambam tells us in the Sefer Mitzvot that this is the core of what Beit HaMikdash is. Now, there are korbanot, no doubt, no question about that. But the Rambam believes that the Beit HaMikdash without korbanot is still the Makom Tfilah, and it's still the optimum Makom Tfilah, even if the Beit HaMikdash is not there. And that's why we're facing Yerushalayim. And if you're in Yerushalayim, you're facing the place of the Mikdash. And if you happen to be on Har HaBayit, you're facing the Kodesh, or the Kodesh Kodeshim even. We're still doing it, because the Shekhinah, Kadosh Baruch Hu's presence, is still there, whether there's a house up there or not. And the Shmoa El Harina Ve'la Tfilah, Shlomo Melech is investing into the notion of Beit HaMikdash that this is a Beit Tfilah. To Harazetim and then there. Right, so it also says Be'olam lo zaz hashchina me'al gabei kotel ha'maravi. This way the kotel became significant, and in that medrash, the kotel ha'maravi actually means the western wall of Beit HaMikdash, which we know the kotel ha'maravi is not the wall of Beit HaMikdash. It's one of the outer walls of the Chatzer. We know that, but nevertheless, the concept that the Shekhinah never left. It has a place where it's still there, and so on. If you look at the Rambam in Slichot Beit HaBchira, Perek Vav, he says, Shechina eina b'teila. The Shechina cannot be eradicated. You can have all the armies in the world, they might be able to defeat a Jewish army, God forbid, but they can't beat HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu is still there. And that's why the Rambam says Yerushalayim's sanctity remains until this very day, even though we may have lost the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael because of halachic circumstances and reasons. So this is the reason that we're connected. So Lishmoa, again, the poet uses the word Lishmoa El Irina with a Vav, just to tell us it's me, Shmuel. But which Shmuel is it? I'm sorry? Right. So if you look at how I enlarged the letters, Shin Mem Vav, skip the ayin, El, Aleph, Lamed. Now we've created like a puzzle. We've put the Shmu and El together. The only problem is we don't know which poet, who it is. A lot of times, if other names are famous, we know the famous poets. We don't know a Shmuel. So in the Rabbi Rosenberg edition, he has by Shmuel with a question mark. We know it's Shmuel. We just don't know which Shmuel. Okay, fine. It's certainly not Shmuel Hanavi. Don't get the wrong idea here. Okay. Now, let's see what we have here. B'motzei menucha kidamnucha tchila. Hat oznecha mimarom yoshev tehila. In English, lend me your ear. Or bend your ear. Literally, hat oznecha means focus your ear. Focus your ear. Give me your undivided attention. Returning to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and asking him, please tune in. I have something to say, and I want you to be there to listen. How do we have the gall? How do we have the gall in Slichot to ask a Kadosh Baruch Hu, Hat Oznecha? Well, because there's precedent. You flip the page to source number 1 on top, from Tehillim Yud Zayin. Ani karaticha ki ta'aneh el, hat oznecha li shma imrati. The phrase hat oznecha is found in the Siddur. When we say Tachnun on Mondays and Thursdays, it's there. It's a phrase that's been adopted. It wasn't made up. It's part of Tehillim. It's also found in Mishlei. It's there in different places. And it's used when we feel we have a right to invite a Kadosh Baruch Hu to listen to our tefillah. What gives us that right? So the Gemara in Masechet Rosh Hashanah, where it talks about Vayavor Hashem al panav vayikra, we don't have it on the source page, but I mentioned it last week. Kadosh Baruch Hu teaches Moshe Rabbeinu the idea of Shloshes Remidot, Hashem kel rachum v'chanum, Erech hapayim v'rav chesed v'emet, Notzer chesed la'alafim, Nosei avon v'fesha, v'chata'a v'nakei. The idea of 13 midot. And Kadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe Rabbeinu, if the generations to come will sin, Ya'aseh lefanai kaseder hazeh v'ani mochel lo. Let them spell it out. This is the formula. How you get a Kadosh Baruch Hu attention, and the Kadosh Baruch Hu promises that He'll be there. He will be there. So there was a great anecdote that the Rav Zechron Levracha said on a Tshuva drasha. You know, the Rav Soloveitchiks, they come from the Sion of Litvaks, of Misnagdim. This is the Vilna Gaon at his best, against the Hasidic movement, Volozhina Yeshiva, and so on. Yet the Rav was a little bit of a hybrid. And it had to do with the fact that when he was 6 years old, the family moved to a town, Chaslovich, where all the residents were Lubavitcher Hasidim. And the Rav in Cheder picked up a lot from the spirit of Chabad that remained with him to the rest of his life. He ends up, by Hashgacha, meeting up with Menachem Mendel Schneerson, who later becomes the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He was the son-in-law of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and this is at the philosophy classes in the University of Berlin. For those, yeah.
I have a granddaughter that married into that family, and they have minhagim like Hasidim. Women don't fast. They don't fast on time and festive. So I looked up where they came from. In 1700, there was Soloveitchik.
Okay, there you go. Yeah, the word Soloveitchik means nightingale. It's a Russian word. It's a Zamir in Hebrew. There was the president of the Supreme Court many years ago, Professor Yitzhak Zamir. He was born Soloveitchik. He Hebraicized the name, so he became a Zamir. Beseda. The idea of the Rav being connected a little bit with Chassidut. In the World War I times, the family fled from Chaslovich. Europe was an upheaval, and the family moves to Warsaw. And in Warsaw, there are all kinds of shuls, and there's also Stieblach. One of the center Hasidic movement of Warsaw was Ger. This town of Ger, Gora Kowalia, is a half-hour drive south of Warsaw. So there are many Ger Hasidim in Warsaw at the time. So the Rav goes to daven on Yom Kippur in a shtibel of Gera Hasidim. I mean, this in itself is absolutely fascinating. And when they get to the vidui, to confess, Ashamnu, Bagadnu, Gazalnu, they're singing a very lively, happy song. And the Rav said, I thought they were out of their minds. You know, as if people didn't understand what they were saying. You know, this is not the kind of stuff that you're supposed to be singing. You're supposed to be bent over and doubling over and crying when you're saying vidui. And here they're singing it. And we even have integrated that into what we call the nusach, the way the Shliach Tzibur davens. Ashamnu, Bagadnu, Gazalnu, Divarnu, Doifi. Who have thought they're out of their minds. Later in life, he says they were far from being out of their minds. Why? The Rav said, the Rambam tells us that the act of tshuva, if it's sincere, can actually be instantaneous. It can cause a scenario where emesh, which in Hebrew means last night, you were distant from a Kadosh Baruch Hu, you davened, the Kadosh Baruch Hu didn't pay attention, you did mitzvahs and a Kadosh Baruch Hu just ripped it up in your face. Kadosh Baruch Hu was just not there for you at all. And today, you are beloved, you're close, Kadosh Baruch Hu is listening to you, embracing you and all that, just in a flip overnight. Now, there's a catch-22. How can you get to that stage of tshuva? You have to do vidui. But when you're saying confession, Kadosh Baruch Hu is still not there because you haven't repented yet. It's like you're in a gray zone. You want to move out of the zone of being a sinner, but you're not there yet as about tshuva. You go through the process. So here is an absolute chesed of a Kadosh Baruch Hu where he's extending credit. In Hebrew we call it ashray. He's giving a certain amount of credit. Because you're on the path of tshuva, I'm willing to take note of you even before you finish the process. And he's willing to stand. That's what the Shloshes Midot and Slichot is all about. Yasu lifanai kaseder hazeh. Lifanai, which means before me. God says, I will be there. Anytime there is a rendezvous with the Shekhinah, it requires an expression of simcha. It requires an expression of simcha. Ki shem Hashem ekra havu godel lelokeinu. Godel is an expression of praise to God. Gedula v'shevach. And that's why the Gerech Hasidim sang the vidui. And the Rav said, and they were right. And they were right. And it's unbelievable, to take from his own life's experience. He thought they were crazy, and then with time, recognized they were far from crazy. But they actually had it right. They actually had it right. And here, with the Slichot, we're asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hat oznecha mimarom. You from above, tune in. How could we dare ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu to tune in? Because he has taken the first step towards us. How do we say it at Nila? Ata noten yad laposhim. You stretch your hand out. This doesn't happen during the year. During the year, we have a bracha in tshuva, Ashivenu avinu toratecha, v'korvenu makenu lavodatecha, v'achzirenu b'tshuva shlema lefanecha, baruch atah Hashem oseh b'tshuva. Tshuva is the 24/7 throughout the year. So what's the big deal about the Seret b'tshuva? It's different. The Rav Kook spoke about the differences. The Rav spoke about, anybody talks about tshuva, will speak about the differences, the qualitative difference of what tshuva is all about in the Aseret B'Tshuva and specifically Yom Kippur, then throughout the year. I'll just say something parenthetical here, that in my own studies of tefillah, every single bracha of Shmon Esrei, every single one, weekday and Shabbos, carries variant readings. Variant readings means that there could be a Nusach Ashkenaz and a Nusach Sfard and a Nusach Ari and a Nusach Chabad and a Nusach this, and Nusach that, all different Nuschaot. And you daven the Nusach that you grew up davening with, and so on. Sometimes you find they're in a shul and davens with a different Nusach, the versions, the text itself, and so on. Every single bracha of the Shmon Esrei, there are variant readings of it. Except tshuva. I searched multiple different sidurim of different communities, and every single one has the bracha of tshuva identical. And I think that's very telling, that we're all coming back to the same road. How you get there is a different story, but at least the destination is identical. It almost sounds like I heard from Rabbi Fendel, Zichron Lebracha, from Long Island fame, West Hempstead fame, and then Medreshet Moriah fame, where he said, "Do you ever notice by Birkat Kohanim, all the Kohanim, if you have 12 Kohanim up there, you can't even hear them saying the bracha. Everybody's saying it and his tone at his pace. But when they get to the word B'Yahava, they're all together, because that's what Avat Yisrael is. You take all the different angles of Am Yisrael and you merge them together. B'Yahava. It's a great word. It's a great idea. But here too, with regard to we talk about the Hat Oznecha Mimarom Yoshev Teilah. We ask Kadosh Baruch Hu Tune in to us, and we have the right to ask us because the Kadosh Baruch Hu is there in front of us. Who is the Yoshev Tehillah? We are familiar with Vata Kadosh Yoshev Tehilot Yisrael. A Kadosh Baruch Hu is the recipient of the Tehillah, which means he's actually the source of the Tehillah. If you look at the source page, source number 2, the Ata Kadosh Yoshev Tehilot Yisrael, which is Tehillah in Perek Kav Bet, we know it from the Siddur, from Uvalat Zion Goel. We say it every morning. The Ata Kadosh Yoshev Tehilot Yisrael. We say HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the Yoshev Tehilot. What does that mean? So the author of the Sefer HaChinuch tries to understand what exactly is meant when we say any bracha, Baruch Atah Hashem. We're giving a Kadosh Baruch Hu a bracha. He needs our brachot. He doesn't need anything. So why are we giving him a bracha? So the author of the Sefer HaChinuch says, that's not the interpretation of Baruch Atah Hashem. Read it the other way. You, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Atah Hashem, are the source of every Baruch. In the word Baruch is every good thing, every useful thing that mankind requires. That's what a bracha is. Because everybody has different bracha. What do you need? What do you need? People go to Rebbes and they go to this and that. They want a bracha. Well, they want a shidduch and they want good health and they want a parnasa and they want this. All kinds of things that people want. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the source of the bracha, and that's why we're turning to him. Atah Hashem Baruch. So we say it in a poetic way, Baruch Atah Hashem. But it really means you, God, are the source of the bracha. And so too, you, God, are the source of all tehillah, of all praise. And when Am Yisrael, as if to say, circles HaKadosh Baruch Hu with all the tehillot that they're saying about HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the source of tehillah, it's as if HaKadosh Baruch Hu is sitting in the middle of the circle. So he is the Yoshev Tehilot Yisrael. Yoshev Tehilot. And here we turn to HaKadosh Baruch Hu first with a note of tefillah. Why? Because Lishmoa El Harina followed by Ve'el HaTfilah. What does Shlomo Melech teach us? That before you ask what you have to ask for, begin with a note of praise. Now Shlomo Melech didn't make this one up. The Gemara says, Bimkom Rina Sham Tehei Tfilah. Rina means song. It means song, it means praise. So where there's the song, that's when you follow with the tefillah, with the praise. You can't just come to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and say, I need something. First start by saying great things about HaKadosh Baruch Hu and acknowledge that he's the address and the only address. It's not that you go to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but if it doesn't work out, I'll go somewhere else. No. He's the absolute exclusive address. And when we say this very clearly, in Musaf on Rosh Hashanah, in Malchiot, we also say it every single day that we finish davening in Aleinu L'Shabeach, V'alkein Nekaveh Ki Lecha Tichra Kol Berech, Tishava Kol Lashon. It is to you, and I remember the Rav emphasizing this, Ki Lecha Af Lecha, only you, Ki Lecha. And we're not looking at competition here, because if a person says, I believe in a Kadosh Baruch Hu, but I believe in some other deity, I believe in some other authority, some other power, that's called Avodah Zarah B'Shituf. You're joining a Kadosh Baruch Hu with some other power. Lo yiyeh lecha Elohim acherim al panai. Not only do you believe in the existence of God, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, which is mitzvah number 1 in the Aseret HaDibrot, you also negate the possibility of any other power, superpower, deity, whatever you want to call it. Lo yiyeh lecha Elohim acherim al panai. And it goes hand in hand. Because if you do accept the validity of some other power, while you accept the Kadosh Baruch Hu, that's called Avodah Zarah B'Shituf. Said it very clearly, and that was Eliyahu Novi and Hara Carmel. Atem poschim al shnei hasiipim ad matai. Until when are you going to be dancing on both sides of the fence? It's not going to work. You're going to have to choose. You're going to have to choose which side of the fence you're on. You can't dance on both sides of the fence. Because in Bayit Rishon, they believed in a Kadosh. Of course they believed in a Kadosh. Of course they knew Eliyahu was a Navi. Except they also believed in the Baal. That's all. They were dancing on both sides of the court. It doesn't work like that. That's called Avodah Zarah B'Shituf. So we tell HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we see ourselves as those who are Yoshev Tehilot Yisrael. And we accept only you. It was Moshe Rabbeinu who actually teaches us this fundamental idea that you begin tefillah with divrei shevach v'hodaya, praise. And that was in Ve'et Chanan. Moshe Rabbeinu has one basic request. He wants to go into Eretz Yisrael. He doesn't want to miss out. Ebrana ve'ereh et ha'aretz hatovah. But how does he begin it? It says, Ve'et Chanan el Hashem be'etehi lemor. Moshe Rabbeinu begins, Ata hachilota laharot et avdecha et godlecha ve'et yadcha chazaka asher mi'el b'shamayim va'aretz asher yaseh tov ki ma'asecha v'chigvuratecha. Well, you are the great, you showed me the beginning of it because of the wars of Sichon and Og in the end of Bamidbar. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, I have a tasting, and I conquered the lands that 2.5 Shvatim are going to occupy. So it says, Matchil b'mitzvah omrim lo gemor. If you start the mitzvah, finish the mitzvah. Finish it. That's why there's a minhag that the Shlich Tzibur for Slichos has the first right to be the Shlich Tzibur for Shachris right after the Slichot. Because of Matchil b'mitzvah omrim lo gemor. If you started, keep it rolling, keep it going. And Moshe Rabbeinu says, Ata hachilota, you began showing me your greatness and so on. Ebrana, I want to complete the task. I want to see the other side. So the Gemara teaches us that the olam yisader adam shivcho shel makom b'chakot yitpalel. First you have to spell out the praises, and then you get to tefillah. And the Gemara cites, Lishmoa el harina ve'el hatfilah. Et yemin oz orera lasot chayel. Betzedek ne'ekad v'nishchat tmuro ayel. Ginona giz'o beza'akatam be'od layel. Lishmoa el harina ve'atfilah. Translated. Et yamin oz orera. Wake up your right side to perform the strength that we need. We'll see where this is taking us. B'tzedek ne'ekad. Somebody who was the righteous, and it's a reference to Yitzchak, was bound, was tied on the Mizbeach, but nishchat tmuro, in his place, a ram was slaughtered. Now, here we're bringing up the Akedah theme. The Akedah theme is going to follow us throughout the Slichot. It's going to be a pivotal moment in Musaf of Rosh Hashanah, in the Bracha of Zichronot. It's Kriyat Torah of the second day of Rosh Hashanah. The story of the Akedah is far from being a one-shot deal, and should not be understood that because Abraham passed the test, so there's bonus merit for all of us. That's how some people seem to indicate. But as we shall see, that's not exactly the case. Why we have brought the Akedah into the Slichot. B'tzedek ne'ekad v'nishchat tmuro ayel, ginon na giz'o. Ginon means to protect, the word l'hagana. To protect the geza, which means the others have come out of. We are the progeny. They've come out of Yitzchak. Beza'akatam, screaming to you, be'od layel, while it's still nighttime. This already tells you that Slichos at 9:30 in the morning is not the right time for Slichos, okay? Slichot is a nighttime affair. And we mentioned this last week. If you take a look at the source, number 6, from the Rambam, the last 3 lines, where it says, Mipnei inyan zeh, na'agu kol beit Yisrael laharbot b'tzedakah v'masim tovim v'lasok b'mitzvot mirosh Hashanah ad Yom Kippurim yet mikol Hashanah. Rambam told us there that we have mitzvot, we have averot. Might be half and half come Rosh Hashanah time, and we want to tip the scale. So we upgrade our mitzvah performance and Gemilut Chesed performance in the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And then he says, V'nahagu kulam, and the custom is lakum balayla, to get up while it's still night. Basara yamim elu, these 10 days, v'litpalel b'batei knesiot, to go to shul, Beit Knesset, v'divrei tachnunim, u'bekibushim, with supplication, what we call slichot. Ad sheyeor hayom, until the break of dawn. Which means, when you finish slichos, that's when you can think about putting on talis and tefillin, and start davening shacharit. But when the slichot begin, 4:30 in the morning. If you go to certain neighborhoods in Yerushalayim, you'll still hear the Gabaim walking around, Slichot, Slichot, waking you up. It's the wake-up call. for Slichot. Because they're getting up at 4:35 in the morning. Not like we lazy Ashkenazim who say Slichos a half hour before we daven, whenever we daven. It's all right, I daven at the 8 o'clock minute at the Shtibloch, I daven at the 9:30 morning at the Shtibloch. So I'm big tzaddik, I come 15 minutes early at 9:15 and gobble up the Slichos. That's not exactly what it's all about. It's a better deal to come at nighttime at 10:30 and say it a little bit better than as a rush order, before Shachris. There's no question about that. But the ideal time, according to the Rambam, was Ashmorat HaBoker. One of the poems that are said during the week is Be'ashmorat HaBoker, which was the ideal time for Slichot. So I mentioned last week, the Kabbalists from a completely different framework introduced the idea of midnight, Chatzot Laila. So Ashkenazim picked up on that for the first Slichot reading and let it go for the rest. There are people who say Slichot every night at midnight, every single night, B'chatzot. But that became the ideal time for the Kabbalists. But the ideal time for the Sfardim and the Rambam here is Ashmorat HaBoker. And that's why the poet says, Be'od Layel. It's still nighttime when I'm screaming to you at nighttime. Let's take this 3 lines independently, dissect them. Et yamin or ora lasot chayil. This should remind you of a pasuk from Hallel. It's in Tehillim. Yamin Hashem osa chayil, Yamin Hashem romema. What does it mean, Yamin Hashem osa chayil? The right side of God. Does God have a right side? Does God have a left side? He doesn't have any side. So we have a concept of Dibra Torah kilashon b'nei Adam. The Torah spells it out in the vernacular, the way human beings speak, so we can somehow figure things out. Rambam spends the first book of the Guide to the Perplexed, the Moreh Nevuchim, explaining all kinds of human material associations with God. Yad chazakah, zroa netuya, etzbe Elokim. I mean, God doesn't have a hand, doesn't have a stretched out arm, he doesn't have a finger. So what is this all about? And even when we talk about the anger of God, so anger is a human emotion. God's not human. So there's no emotion there, and there's no size, and there's no time framework. None of that. It's very hard for human beings to contemplate this, and we cannot even understand why people fell for Avodah Zarah. Because they wanted to touch something. Why did they fall for the egel, the golden calf? But they didn't realize who took them out of Mitzrayim? It wasn't such a long time ago. When did they make the egel? On Shivasa B'Tammuz? My gosh, they left Mitzrayim just a few months earlier. They forgot who brought about the Makot, who brought about the splitting of the Red Sea, who brought about Matan Torah on Shavuot 40 days earlier. I mean, OUisrael has a long-term memory, certainly short-term memory. I mean, how did this happen? Because this was a human need. They didn't believe that the egel was God. They said, Eile Elohecha Yisrael asher halucha me'Mitzrayim, the Elokecha is Kodesh. But they said there was a Kadosh Baruch Hu, but I'm just looking at this egel so that I can think about a Kadosh Baruch Hu. That's the way we understand it. They weren't idolatries. We weren't violating Avodah Zarah in the fullest. It was a mistake, and the Rambam tells us in the beginning of the laws of Avodah Zarah, this was the great mistake of mankind, that they thought that they were so small and they couldn't get close to God, they needed an intermediary. And the intermediary would then bring our needs to God. But we'll talk to the intermediary, whether it's the sun, whether it's the moon, whether it's a tree, whether it's a stone, whatever it is, a statue, an intermediary. And that's how Avodah Zarah. And then they forgot that there was God at the other end of the line. And it just became the object of the Avodah Zarah. Rambam speaks about this, the development of Avodah Zarah. So remember the Shirat Hayam, Yimincha Hashem nedari b'koach, Yimincha Hashem tiratz oyev. In the Shirah. So Chazal talk about the double usage of the right side of God. What does that mean? So, it says, Mikol Mulam Dai Hiskalti. We learn from everybody. At YU, at Yeshiva University, we had to take liberal arts courses. No matter what you majored in, you had to have a sprinkling of everything, so that you're not an ignoramus when it comes to any particular subject. So you have to take a little of this and a little of that, and a little of this and a little of that, and you major. Here in Israel, the university doesn't work like that. You get into medical school on day one, and that's what you study. So when you're in medical school, you're not studying classical music and the history of art. But at YU, and especially with those who are going to be Rabbanim, they wanted people to be acquainted with everything. So we had a course, a semester's work on the history of art, classical art. His name was Professor Chernowitz. The man's father was a tremendous Talmid Chacham, Rav Chaim Chernowitz. He was known as Rav Tzair. He was a poet, and he was together with the group of Bialik and Peretz and that chug, that group. But he was religious. Bialik was a Melosian, and then he left it all. But Rav Chernowitz remained a Shemet Torah mitzvahs and a Talmid Chacham and everything. His son was an artist, and he taught the history of art at YU. Most people just did that course, as we say, just check, I did it, that's it, let's move on. But really didn't take it too seriously. And remember, we learned about ancient Egyptian art. And he would bring in illuminated, hand-illuminated manuscripts of Haggadot Shel Pesach, where there'd be pictures of Paroi, in the scenes of the Haggadah. And he said, take a look, what's strange? You know what strange is? Every foot of Paroi, the right or the left, was a right foot. And every hand of Paro, the right and the left, was a right hand. The right hand and the right hand. The way their fingers are, right? The fingers should be the opposite. The left hand of Paro was a right hand. The left foot, the ankle, was a right foot. And the reason this was done, because in Egyptian culture, right meant strong and left meant weak. And the Paroi, even his left side was a right side. That was the point. And it reflected itself in ancient Egyptian art. And Am Yisrael was well acquainted with this. And therefore, when Moshe Rabbeinu sings the Shira, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it can't be any less than the way they understood about a Paroi. And hence, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has two right sides. Even though HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't have any side. But if we're going to talk about sides, he's going to have Yemincha Hashem, Yemincha Hashem. And David HaMelech reiterates this in Tehillim. Yemin Hashem Osachayil, Yemin Hashem Romema, Yemin Hashem Osachayil. He reiterates it. There is only a right side to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because there's only strength. There's no weakness. There's no weak side to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's why when we put on tefillin, we put on the tefillin shel yad on the weaker hand. Yad keheh. So if a person is, most people write with the right hand, so they put tefillin on the left hand. If the person happens to be a Moshe Kapoya, and he writes with his left hand, and does everything else with his left hand, so then he puts the tefillin on the right hand. The idea is that the tefillin is keneged halev, and you want the weaker side. Why the weaker side? Because the strong side is only HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We are human beings. We are people who require things. We don't have everything. We are faulty. So we are the weaker side. So at Yemin Oz Orera, we ask Kadosh Baruch Hu to perk up the right side, Lasot Chayil. Yemin Hashem Oseh Chayil. If you look at the source page, and I quoted here from the Parshat Ekev, source number 5. Ve'amarta bilvavcha. If you say, Kochi ve'otzem yadi asa li et hachayil hazeh. Wow, I did it. I brought about these great achievements. I brought about these great victories. So Moshe Rabbeinu tells them, buddy, you got it all wrong. V'zacharta et Hashem Elokecha. Remember HaKadosh Baruch Hu, ki hu hanoten lecha koach, lasot chayil, to do all the strength and everything that you need for defense and success. Leman hakim et brito asher nishba lavotecha kayom hazeh. You're making a mistake if you think it's kochi ve'otzem yadi asa li et hachayil hazeh. I always like those politicians who always use the word I and me in their speeches, and they forget that maybe there's somebody else. It was the Medrash that teaches us, why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu, at the creation of the world and creation of man, say, Na'aseh Adam b'tzalmenu, let us make man? Why didn't it say, E'eseh Adam? because HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to teach us that he took counsel by the Malachim. Says, you think it's a good idea to make a man, human being? It didn't make a difference what they responded. We're never told what if the Malachim took a vote or they thought it was a good idea or not good idea. Kadosh Baruch Hu was teaching us that even if you're top of the line, take counsel by your subordinates. It's a very good thing. It's a humbling experience. And that's why, yeah, Vaksha.
I think the title of Shimon, I think they all changed it.
Yefeh me'od. Yefeh me'od. Okay, I'll repeat it. So you're quoting the Gemara in Masechet Gittin Daf Tet, where it says Megillah Daf Tet, Megillah Daf Tet, where it says there that the Septuagint, the Targum HaShevim, the 70 Chachamim who are coerced to go down to Alexandria and translate the Torah, and they put him in the Alexandria Hilton. But literally, but all separate rooms and no communication. They had no intercom. And they were all asked to give 70 versions of the Torah. They all made 70 changes, subtle changes, and that was Ruach HaKodesh. And one of them was E'eseh Adam B'Tzalmo. Listen, they were the Egyptians, the Palmai, Philadelphus, the fifth. He wasn't into Medrash, so this could have led to an understanding that there are multiple deities. Na'aseh Adam B'Tzalmenu. And that's why they translated, instead of Breshit bara Elokim, they translated Elokim bara Breshit. God created the beginning, and not, because you might suggest that Bereshit is a God who created Elokim. So just to to prevent that kind of misunderstanding and so on. So that's quite correct. So, but the pshat of the Medrash says, Na'aseh Adam B'Tzalmenu, was teach us limda Torah derech eretz. The Kadosh Baruch Hu taught human beings that if you're the chairman of the board, take counsel. There was in YU, the president of the yeshiva in my days was Dr. Samuel Belkin, Zichrono Livracha, who, by the way, was a tremendous Talmid Chacham. He had smicha from the Chofetz Chaim at age 17 in Radin. Dr. Belkin, who people just knew as a president of the university and a big fundraiser, he had smicha from the Chofetz Chaim at age 17, and he was chavruta with the Chofetz Chaim's son-in-law, Reb Mendel Zaks. Dr. Belkin, in my days, he had to carry the title of Rosh Yeshiva, but he didn't interfere with what was going on in the yeshiva. But he did have one honorary task to pick the Gemara, what the yeshiva was going to learn the next year. But in the Rav Shir, Dr. Belkin never interfered even on that, and let the Rav do whatever he felt like doing. Fine. So one year, so we knew the Rav, it was going to be announced what Gemara we're going to learn. One of the years that I was in the Shir, the Rav comes in, and he starts taking a poll. What would you like to learn this year? And everybody was like floored, Oh, you want Masechet Shabbat? What would you like? Masechet Chulin? What would you like? Baba Kama? What would you like? Baba Metzia? And everybody's going around, and the Rav looks and he says, all right, we're learning Psachim this year. It wasn't even one of the choices. So then everybody looks at him like, what was this all about? He said, I want you to know that I'm a Democrat. But Moshe ole al gabehen. Moshe has veto over everybody, over the Sanhedrin. So you have an opinion. That's okay. Keep your opinion to yourself. What we do here is what I'm telling you to do. It was a good opening line because there was a lot of tension at the beginning of the year, and it really broke the ice. And he was good at that. The Rav had dramatic flair to break the ice. So here we have Yemin Ozra Lasot Chayil. Okay? B'tzedek ne'ekad. And here's the Akedah theme. So let's talk about the Akedah thing for a moment. Again, many of the Slichot throughout the week are going to focus on the Akedah. In the Aseret Mei Tshuva, there's going to be a poem that's called the Akedah every single day of the Aseret Mei Tshuva. Sfaradim have a poem that they say every single day for the 40 days. Imafes Rova Hakein. If the bird cage is empty, and that is to say, the word afes means efes. If the cane, if the nest where the birds that are prepared and ready for korban mincha in Beit HaMikdash, you can have a bird offering. If it's empty, it's a nice way of saying there's no Beit HaMikdash. Im afes rova hakein. The poet goes on to tell us about not just the Akedah of Yitzhak, but he's going to tell us about our Akedot. Velokim nisat Avraham. Kadosh Baruch Hu tests Avraham, as he will continually test Am Yisrael with different types of akedot. Sometimes the akeda, which means being self-sacrificial, is very benign. Very benign. It doesn't, there's no pain involved. It might be costly, might, cut into your wallet, but it's benign. For example, I grew up in the United States. There was anti-Semitism on October 31st. On Halloween, they would throw eggs at us. The yeshivas would let us out 3 hours early because we should get home safely. Yeah, I remember this very day. But anti-Semitism was there. It was under the rug. We know that. Now, after October 7th, it's not under the rug. It's out there. But it's not new, except that Am Yisrael functioned decently enough in the United States. And if we talk about post-World War II, where prosperity, hit many, if not most, of the Jewish homes on some level of prosperity, people weren't poverty-stricken. So the self-sacrificing nature had to do with kashrus, spending a little more money for kosher food, spending money for Jewish education, spending money sometimes Shabbos-related, Mesirat Nefesh. In the 30s, Shabbat was the big test, the absolutely big test of being committed to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It was very difficult to remain Shomer Shabbos in the days of depression. So each generation has its test. You come to Eretz Yisrael, and all of a sudden you find out that the test is very different. We're not being tested here on kashrut. The only test you have is, if some family member comes over and tells you which hashkacha he's not eating from. We're not being tested on Shabbat. We're not being tested for Tarat HaMishpacha. What are we being tested? We're being tested on the ultimate test. Are you willing to give up your life for Eretz Yisrael? That's no small akeda. But if you go back 900 years to the First Crusade, where people gave up their lives not to baptize, and the days of the Inquisition, the days of the pogroms of Eastern Europe of the 17th century, 1648, all the way up to the Shoah, Mesirat Nefesh, what people didn't do to remain close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There is a poem that was written by Rav Saadia Gaon, and what's fascinating is it could have been written today, could have been written 70 years ago after the Shoah, or even during the Shoah, could have been written any single generation pre-Rav Saadia Gaon. The man lived in the 10th century. So he didn't live through even the First Crusade. And yet he writes a poem that some kihilot say on Erev Rosh Hashanah. It's not a terribly long poem, but it's a type of poem that almost spells out the avarachamim that we say on Shabbat, which is a type of collective yizkar for kilot kodesh, shemasru nafsham al kiddush Hashem. And he spells it out. The blood of avot ubanim, the blood of rachmaniyot and their children, women, compassionate women and their children, which was mixed with vanit arvu demei achim v'achayot, mixed with the blood of the brothers and sisters, and the blood of the sons-in-law and daughters-in-law, and the blood of the chachamim and chachamot, and the blood of hagunim v'hagunot, the special perfect people, udemei chasidim v'chasidot, udemei, the blood of zikenim v'zkenot, udemei bachurim bachurot, udemei parnasim v'chazanim, the supporters of Torah and the shamashim. The Chazan was the Shamash of the Beit Knesset. Udmei dayanei v'sofreihem, the blood of the judges and the scribes at the Beit Din, the secretaries. Udmei melamdim v'talmidehem, those who taught Torah to kids and their children, their students. Udmei anashim v'nushotehem, men and their wives. Ne'ergu kulam yachad al kiddush Hashem hamiyuchad. This was going on already in the days of Rav Saadia Gaon. And he comes to Kadosh Baruch Hu, and he's using the same psukim as the Avarachmim that was written after the First Crusade. Kidam avad harninu goyim amo, kidam avadav yikom, v'nakam yeshiv l'tzarav, v'chiper admato amo. We ask Kadosh Baruch Hu to avenge all this blood. And then he gets to the point. This is Erev Rosh Hashanah. Et eile mizbechot zechor. God, remember these altars, these mizbechot. Ve'eile akedot tir'eh v'hinachem. And a Kadosh Baruch Hu should remember all these akedot. These aren't the akedot that ended with Yitzchak walking off the akedah, and a ram, an ayil, gets slaughtered in his place. These are the akedot who didn't leave the Mizbeach. And he asks the Kadosh Baruch Hu, Chus v'rachem et yeter hapleta, the survivors. Kadosh Baruch Hu should have compassion. V'totzena me'afela le'orah, should take us out of the dark to the light. V'chadesh aleinu shana tova, v'shnat ratzon v'eit geula. I mean, you could see Rav Sadia going crying. How can you not cry? This is the Akedah theme in running through all of the Slichot. And for Ashkenazim, it begins right here. V'tzedek ne'ekad v'nishchat t'muro ayel. And we ask Kadosh Baruch Hu, Ginana giz'o b'zakatam be'od layel. There are different understandings to be'od layel. One is, it's still nighttime, as I said before. We're davening Slichos at 4 a.m. So it's still nighttime. And the other is that it's still galut. It's still galut. And we're asking Kadosh Baruch Hu, maybe he can bail us out even before the Geula. Even when it's still Laila, when we're still in exile, and we're still longing for the days, maybe you can give us a break now, the Od Layel, while it's still nighttime. If you look at source number 7, it's a pasuk in Yeshayahu, Perek Lamed Gimel. Chanenu lecha kivinu heyei zroam labekarim, af yeshuatenu be'eit tzara. While it's true that we hope, kivinu from the word tikva, we hope you, God, will stretch out your arm, your zroa, in the morning, labikarim, you're going to bring the gula, but in the meantime, until that happens, af yeshuatenu be'eit tzara. Maybe in the middle of the tzara, of the difficulty, you can bail us out. Right now. Ya'ancha Hashem biyom tzara. So the Malbim in source number 8 explains this. I'll just read the last 2 lines. Labkarim be'eit haboker, shehi be'eit hagula. That's we're looking and longing for, the morning. Aval, 2 lines before the end, in source number 8. Aval anu yeshuatenu tiyeh be'eit tzara, but the Yeshua should be while we're still, even though we're still in tzara. Lanu lo tamtin. Please don't wait at 8 haboker. We can't make it. We can't hang on any longer. It's too difficult. You're going to have to help us out now. You may have plans for another 100 years, another 1,000 years for the Gula. We can't make it. We can't wait. You need to help us now. Even the Od Layel. Lo tamtin ad haboker, rak toshia lanu be'eit tzara, be'od Layel, be'eit sheyotzur al Yerushalayim. Even though Yerushalayim is still not redeemed at all yet. This is something that the poet is saying here on Motzei Shabbat of the first Slichot, the Shmoa el Harina ve'el Atfilah. I'm just going to jump to the last stanza here. Vitzei atiratam be'omdam balelot. We ask Kadosh Baruch Hu to listen to our tefillah. Atar means tefillah. Vayetar Yitzchak kenochad lo. We ask Kadosh Baruch Hu to accept our tefillah as we stand at the nighttime. She'eina beratzon. Kadosh Baruch Hu should accept our tefillah as if it was a real korban. Kalil ve'olot. Now the idea that our tefillah is in place of the korbanot. The idea of the schedule of tefillah corresponds to Beit HaMikdash tefillah. This is known. The idea that a korban olah gets completely burned up on the Mizbeach. There's no portions that are parceled out, neither to the Kohen nor to the person bringing the korban. A korban olah. It's Kalil Hashem, complete. We ask Kadosh Baruch Hu to accept our tefillot, not partially, not segmented, but it should accept our tefillot like a korban olah. Tar'em nisecha. You can do it. You can bring out nisim. We know that. Even though it says, Ein somchin al hanes. Don't rely on miracles, but we're desperate. And we ask Kadosh Baruch Hu, bail us out, even if it means showing us a miracle. Oseg dolot. Perform great things. Let this happen. Lishmoa el harina vel tefillah. And this is how we're going to begin the season of Slichot. And in Mitzvah Hashem, we'll all daven well as much as we can. And next week in Mitzvah Hashem Wednesday, I'm going to bring another piyut that will relate to Yamim Noraim to somehow augment our tefillah. Because after that, we're not going to meet till after Sukkot. That's the way the calendar is written, and I don't write the rules. So next week we'll do some piyut that will be Yamim Noraim related as well. Okay, that's it.